Hello Peachies! Welcome back to Dear Peachy. Wasian makeup is having a major moment on XiaoHongShu right now. We've shared a few tutorials before, but today we're diving into one of the trendiest looks that's been going viral across the platform. It all started with a random car selfie from this girl, somehow blew up overnight. And soon after, makeup influencers everywhere began recreating her look. What makes it so captivating is how it blends Korean-inspired softness with Western makeup techniques. You get that perfect balance, structured and defined features, yet still soft, effortless, and naturally radiant at the same time. For today's feature, we're spotlighting Tong, one of the creators who recreated this look incredibly well. Her video alone has already gained close to 40,000 likes, and it's easy to see why. She's actually a professional makeup artist, which really shows in how precisely she captures the details and overall vibe of the look. She's also steadily growing her fan base through her in-depth tutorials, where she experiments with different styles that suit her features. Whether it's clean and minimal or full-on dramatic K-pop idol stage makeup, she really does it all. Honestly, her account feels like a little goldmine for makeup inspiration. Before getting into the tutorial, Tong first breaks down what really gives this look its distinct Western vibe. She points out that it starts with the eyes. Lighter eye colors instantly create that slightly more foreign feel, and when paired with a sharp, dark winged liner, it lifts and elongates the eye shape beautifully. The nose contour plays a huge role here. By focusing on the nose bridge, especially around the root and eye socket area, it creates a more structured and prominent look. She also adds definition to the tip, giving it that slightly pointy, almost boxy finish that you often see in Western-style contouring. At the same time, the softness of the overall look really comes from Korean-inspired elements. She uses lighter shades throughout, keeps the brows fluffy and less structured, and goes for lips that are more muted and unsaturated. Nothing looks too harsh or overly defined. Instead, everything is softly blended out, giving that slightly smudgy, diffused, almost blurry effect. Tong also mentions that once you understand and capture these key elements, the whole look actually becomes much easier to recreate. For the base, Tong keeps things really simple and lightweight. Before that, she uses a salmon pink shade from her MAC Conceal palette to correct and brighten the pigmentation around her mouth area. Then she mixes a primer with a tinted moisturizer. This step is mainly to subtly brighten her overall complexion while still keeping the skin looking fresh and natural. When it comes to contouring, she starts by her jawline to shape the face. For the nose, she focuses a lot on the tip. She contours along the base and connects it upward, creating almost like a square bracket shape that wraps around the tip. This technique gives that slightly bony, boxy effect. At the nose root, she adds a soft, C-shaped contour around the inner corners of the eyes. She also applies contour on the philtrum and just under the lower lip to enhance depth. To make her eyes stand out more, she lightly adds contour to the outer corners of the eyes, blending it towards the tail of the brows. Once all the contour is placed, she blends out the facial contour using a damp puff. For the more detailed areas like the nose and smaller sections, she switches to a nose contour brush. Next, Tong mixes a matte highlighter with whatever tinted moisturizer is left on her hand, then lightly dabs it onto the inner areas of her face, like the center of her cheeks, the sides of her nose, mouth corners, nose tip, inner corners of the eyes, T-zone, brows bone, both above and below, and the cheekbones. The idea here is to lift and brighten the high points so they stand out more against the contour. After placing it, she uses a finger puff to gently tap everything out until it melts seamlessly into the skin. For blush, she starts with a nude peach cream blush as her base. She places it right below the iris, making sure it doesn't go lower than the level of her nose. She also taps a bit onto the nose, layering it above the matte highlight she just applied, and adds a touch under the nose tip to create that soft, warm, slightly fuzzy effect. To build more dimension, she goes in with a tiny amount of a rose pink blush and concentrates it at the center of the blush area. She emphasizes going in with a very light hand here because adding too much at once can flatten the look and make the blush appear overly intense instead of naturally layered. Whatever product is left on the puff, she lightly dabs it across the bridge of the nose to tie everything together. She also points out that the original look actually leans more cool-toned when it comes to blush, so it's something to keep in mind if you're trying to match it closely. To enhance the nose contour further, she uses a mauvey brown cream blush and layers it over the nose root contour. This step adds a more natural, skin-like flush, giving that subtle complexity you'd see in real skin rather than a flat contour. Finally, she sets everything in place with a loose powder, and Tong mentions that you don't want a completely flat, matte finish for this look. For the eye area, she switches to a compact powder and uses a powder puff to set around the lids and brows with a bit more coverage. After that, Tong goes back in with a powder contour palette to further define the nose, especially around the tip. She then pops in a pair of colored contact lenses to lighten her eye color, a gray lens with a subtle blue-gray ring. It adds to that Wasian vibe instantly, but if you're not into wearing lenses, it's totally fine to skip this step. Moving on to the eyeshadow, she starts with a nude shade to even out the skin tone across her lids. She blends it softly all over the upper lid, but keeps it within the area and avoids going beyond the inner corner contour she placed earlier. Then, she switches to a warm brown shade and applies it along the crease, blending it upwards. She's careful not to bring this shade into the inner corner contour area, keeping that structure clean. Whatever is left on the brush, she lightly sweeps it across the lower lash line for balance. To soften everything, she goes back in with the brush she used for the nude shade and gently blends out the edges of the eyeshadow so there are no harsh lines. Next, she picks up a light top shade with a small, dense precision brush to define the under-eye fat area, also known as the aiguille. Since her natural aiguille is a bit more rounded, she actually conceals parts of it first to slightly adjust the shape, making it look more elongated. Then it's time to move on to the lashes. She starts by curling her lashes and applying mascara to prep them before going in with falsies. For this look, she chooses a wispy, flared-out style. The pair she uses has a B curl, so it's not overly dramatic or too lifted, which helps keep the overall vibe balanced. Since the eyeliner is really the star of this eye look, she actually tightlines her lash line with a black gel liner first, even before applying falsies. For the falsies, Tong places them on top of her natural lashes. She lifts the lash strip from the packaging and dips it horizontally into the glue, so the entire lash band gets an even coat. Then she places it right on top of her lashes and gently presses it slightly downward. This prevents the lashes from looking too overly curled or lifted. To match the eye shape from the original look more closely, she also uses eyelid tape to subtly adjust and lift her eye shape. Next, she switches to a flat-edged brush and picks up a deep brown eyeshadow to start defining the inner corner liner. She follows the natural shape of her inner corner to map it out first. Then, going in with a brown gel liner, she lifts the inner corner and traces along that shape, before bringing the line slightly downward and extending it to about the first third of the lower inner eye area. For the winged liner, she switches to a black gel liner and starts by extending a line outward from the outer corner of her eye. Then, she draws another line from the outer edge of her iris, connecting it to form a small triangle. She gently pulls her lid and fills in that triangle, creating a clean, lifted wing. To soften the look, she goes back in with a brown eyeshadow and lightly blends over the liner, diffusing the edges so it doesn't look too harsh. For the lower lashes, she mentions that if you naturally have fuller lashes, a coat of mascara would honestly be enough. But since her lashes are quite sparse, she adds a bit of help using falsies. She picks up a few of the more prominent lash clusters and places them right below the center of her eye, under the iris. She keeps it minimal, just a few clusters, so it enhances the eyes without giving that overly doll-like or dramatic effect. Then, going back to the top shade again, she deepens the color at the outer part of her lower lash line. She explains that this step is important because adding lash clusters in the center can make the outer area look a bit empty. By slightly deepening that section, It balances out the entire eye look and keeps everything cohesive. Next, she picks up a white satin finish highlighter and applies it right at the center of her aegyosul, just below the pupil, to really make that area pop. She also adds a touch to the inner corners of her eyes to brighten them up even more. When you compare the before and after, the difference is actually so noticeable. Her eyes instantly look brighter, wider, and more awake. Moving on to the brows, she goes in with a brow powder. She starts with the lightest gray shade in the palette to map out the overall tone and direction of the brows. Then, switching to a deeper brown, she adds more structure, focusing on the center of the brows and extending the tails. The shape she creates is quite straight, which complements the overall look. To finish, she uses a dark brown tinted brow gel to even everything out. She then repeats the same steps on the other eye. Once the eyes are done, Tong moves on to refining the details of the look. She takes a light pink blush and lightly layers it over her existing blush and across her nose to enhance that soft flush. Then she switches to a pink-toned matte highlighter and adds it to the mid-face to further brighten and lift the area. Using that same white satin highlighter again, she taps a little more onto her brow bone for an extra glow. For the lips, she starts by gently blotting them with a napkin, then pats on a bit of foundation to tone down her natural lip color. She goes back to the light pink blush and, using a small blending brush, softly fills in areas like the Cupid's bow, the upper lip, and just under the lower lip to subtly shape and enhance them. She also lightly defines the corners of her mouth along the upper lip. Then she layers on a pink nude shade as her base lip color, followed by a rosy pink on top to add more depth and dimension. To finish everything off, she takes a champagne-toned, shimmery highlighter and adds a final touch to the inner corners of her eyes and the aegyosul. And just like that, the whole look comes together beautifully. What do you think about this look? For us, we actually feel like it leans a lot more towards an East Asian aesthetic rather than a true Wasian balance. Even though there are some Western-inspired elements, like the structured nose contour, lighter eye color, and that lifted wing, the overall vibe still reads very soft and diffused. But it's still super pretty and wearable. Let us know if you would give this look a try. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next video. Goodbye.